r/AskReddit. What was an uncanny, creepy or terrifying moment in your life that felt, or feels in retrospect, like a scene right out of a thriller or a horror movie? My wife and I had checked into a hotel room and had gone to bed. My wife is asleep, I'm just starting to drift off to sleep when I hear a soft voice in the dark room, just above a whisper say, "I think they're asleep now." Thinking I just heard the voice of someone hiding in our room, I jump out of bed in terror, turn on all the lights, search the bathroom, shower, under the bed, the closet, but there was nothing. My wife and I were the only two people in the room. Now some people might have believed the room was haunted, but what I experienced was a hypnagogic hallucination, but for a few minutes there I was quite terrified. A customer followed me home from work, but I don't drive and catch public transport, so the effort to do so not just an accident. Then the next day he casually mentioned things like what my house looked like to me. Okay, this creeps me out. Were you able to report him to your work or at least police so there is a record of it? In case he does it again and you can get a restraining order, etc. I told my work and they were like, we don't want to lose a customer. Worked in a place with pokies. They said we will have a male manager talk to him. There were two managers, me and another woman. They had to get one from another location come in. I quit because of it. I was falling asleep staring at the ceiling. We have a few night lights in the room so we don't die when we get up to pee during the night. The night light is casting a weird shadow on the ceiling that looked oddly like the profile of a face, and the more my brain and eyes focus in on it, the more detailed and menacing it began to look. I am completely fixated on this face, and then suddenly it turned to look at me. I screamed and thrashed around in my blankets, waking my highly irritated partner who was yelling, "What? What?" at this point. My brain then realized that the shadow was created by the blanket and my partner's foot, and when they moved their foot it made it appear as if the face had turned to look at me. I was so embarrassed that I told my partner I had a nightmare and turned over and went to sleep. I'm laughing and shaking trying to not wake my baby on me, hahaha. This is so something that would happen to me, lol. I was cutting down a large tree, it hit another tree on the way down, which I planned on. Then a very large branch from the tree I cut, broke off, and kind of catapulted of a branch from the tree it hit, through the air, maybe 20 yards, and landed right at my feet. Inches away from death. At the time I felt a rush of excitement, like, fuck yes, that could have been it. My uncle is in his late 80s. He was cutting down a tree. It hit a tree that was already cut and lying on the ground. Tree fell, hit other tree that pivoted into his shins. Both legs are broken. While in rehab he watches an ambulance pull up to hospital emergency doors. He didn't know it, but his wife was in the ambulance, DOA. She had a heart attack while getting ready to visit him. Bad SHH happens fast. I bet she said, "That man will be the death of me," as she was getting ready. Years ago I was living in my first solo apartment, no roommate, just me. I was excited for Christmas that year and decorated my apartment really cute. I had a nativity set that my mom had designed and made for me and I loved it. I set it up on the floor, in front of my tree. At the last minute, I was able to fly home for the holiday and spend it with my parents in a different state. A few days after I returned, I had a knock at my front door. I opened it to find a man and his wife, appeared to be in their mid-50s, and they seemed very surprised to see me. They asked if Larry was there. I told them I didn't know anyone named Larry. They insisted he was their son and he lived in this apartment. I assured them that this was my place and no one named Larry lived there. They said they had spent Christmas Day with Larry in this apartment, then pointed to where my tree had been and asked what I had done with the beautiful, custom-made nativity that had been there. They loved it and Larry had told his mother she could have it. I had several odd things happen in that apartment, but I was young and didn't have good sense, so I didn't move for 3 years. I was young and still had a lot of stuffed animals from when I was a kid. I came home from work one evening and they were all lined up in a row under my bedroom window. The covers on my bed were turned down and a clean pair of panties were on my pillow, did not leave the place that way when I left for work that morning. I had things disappear from there like a nightshirt I loved, a coffee mug, and a photo of myself and my cousin. A couple of times I looked out the window and saw a guy standing by my car, staring at my window, but it was a different guy each time. Once I heard a noise in the hallway and looked through the peephole in the door. What I saw was an eye staring in at my through the peephole, just weird stuff that none of my neighbors seemed to experience. One time, there was a bit of activity before this, but it would take forever to type. I was brushing my teeth. I walked out of the room and my instincts went, bro, you need to go back in that room, so I took 3 backward steps into the room to find someone staring in my window. Was after a tornado, and they were definitely up to no good. I get goosebumps thinking about it. I yelled frick no, and they ran to their car and peeled out. Just curious, what was the significance of the tornado? Was he looking to loot evacuated houses? Probably steal something. Compared to a lot of these, this will sound really tame. I was driving home very late at night down a narrow country lane. It was a typical UK winter night, so really dark, rainy and windy. On the lane was a small stone humpback bridge, the kind that is so steep you can't see over the other side. I slowed and began to cross the bridge, and in my headlights I saw hundreds of mice rushing across the road from right to left across the bridge. This was impossible as the bridge is raised over a stream, with solid stone walls on either side. I gasped and hit the brakes, coming to a stop on the middle of the bridge, and in the next sweep of the wipers I saw nothing. Just some leaves blowing in the wind. I know it sounds really mild, but I have remembered this vividly for over 10 years now, and I was so freaked out at the time. Was driving from the local airport. My wife is a pilot, one evening with my future wife. About 9 p.m. The road took us by a pull-off where some county dumpsters were on one side of the road. As we drove by, a blacked-out car that had been parked spun out on the gravel and got right behind me doing the speed limit. I mean, he was so close in the rear view I could only see the tint on his windshield, not even his car's hood. Wasn't a police car. It was an early 2000s Chevy. He was following us. I took some random turns using my blinker, thinking at first he was just going the same way as me and wanted me to hurry up on the one-lane road with a double yellow. But after about 3 random turns that kept up in the same era, I realized it wasn't random. Told my wife to hold on to something and aggressively turned down a side road with my blinker indicating another way. Sped 90 down a road with a much lower speed than that, took a few extra turns, and ended up parking in the airport parking lot. Turned off my lights and we waited. Same car came barreling down the road I was just on, hauling ass. Watched him go around a bend out of sight and took off hauling ass in the opposite direction with my lights off, using the moonlight to see. Once I got close to a main road, I flicked the lights on and drove under the speed limit the rest of the way home. Freaked us both out so much. Almost called the cops and parked at the police station so the cops could pull him over instantly. No idea what they were doing, but didn't play games with that shit. I woke up from a coma in hospital. I was completely paralyzed and my vocal cords were fricked so I couldn't talk at all. I was in so much pain. I was put on ketamine, but nobody told me this, so I couldn't understand why I was hallucinating. I saw some really scary stuff. I believed I was strapped to the bed and in some kind of illegal experimentation center. The nurses were covered in blood and the doctors wore masks and kept screaming at the top of their voices. I cried so much and the nurses were trying to figure out why. I was desperately trying to ask them not to hurt me, but I had no voice. This went on for a week until I was taken off the ketamine. It's been 12 years and I still have nightmares. I will never touch a hallucinogenic drug again, as I've been told you can get flashbacks to the other times you were on the drug. I will never go back there. Every time I get ill I'm scared I will have another coma and refuse to call an ambulance even in the most dire situations. I genuinely thought I was in a horror film. It was freaking terrifying. Finally, someone who can relate. I was just in the hospital a few months ago from being in a fire. My vocal cords were fricked too. The meds they had me on gave me such an intense hallucination it took me like 2 weeks to finally accept it didn't happen. In the hallucination a nurse was torturing me for hours. It was so real. I was also trapped in a facility, with other people strapped into their beds. In the hallucination I even kept telling myself, this has got to be a dream, and I would look around in the hallucination trying to prove it was a dream, but it was so real. God. I never want to be on those hospital meds again. It was the worst experience of my life. I was babysitting and the kids were asleep upstairs. The only lights on in the house were 3 table lamps in the living room, where I was doing homework. The phone rang. This is the 80s, so I answer the landline. I hear a dial tone, but the phone keeps ringing after I answer it. I fiddle with the phone and it eventually stops ringing, but still has the dial tone. This happens twice. I keep doing homework. All at once, all 3 table lamps turn off. They won't turn back on. There is no overhead light in that room. Now the house is completely dark. Then, a huge noise comes from the far side of the house. It sounded like the furnace was dying or they had a captive wild animal. I bounded up the stairs and turned on the hallway light. I sat in the hallway outside the kids' bedrooms until the parents came home. I was too scared to go into the kitchen and use the one phone to call someone. The parents explained everything when they returned. 1. They had a dual-line phone. There was a tiny switch on the side of the phone. If I had flipped it, I would have been able to answer the line that was ringing. 2. All the table lamps in the living room were on timers, so they would get turned off in the evening to save electricity. 3. The noise was their hot water radiator heating system. Apparently the pipes make that sound when the system turns itself on. I suggested they tell future babysitters about these things. When I was living in my parents' house, my bedroom had this closet that sat directly opposite my bed. For whatever reason I can't remember, the door couldn't close. That closet had always given me bad vibes, and I almost never slept, but the worst was one night when I was home alone. I was laying in bed trying to sleep, when suddenly it got eerily quiet. I was home alone, but I could typically hear nighttime sounds coming from outside. As I lay there trying to rationalize, I started to hear some whispering. At first I couldn't make it out, but then I recognized it as my name. Obviously freaked out, I was nearly paralyzed with fear. I sat there for what felt like forever, when I felt what felt like a thin finger, slowly tracing down my foot from toes to heel. The rest of that night is honestly a blur, but I remember having this super strong urge to look into the closet. I'm happy I never did. When I got jumped at 17. Scariest part was knowing how much older these people were, while one was attempting to slash my throat with a pocket knife. And then got my shit kicked in by all 3. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more daily uploads.